What? Wait, who are you? O'Brany cast an untrusting look at the tiny diesel. The 060 didn't really care for diesels. The only ones on the branch were the two SR Class 03s that scurried about the central dockyard with Trapper. They were CPMR number 148 and 149. He tolerated them at most. This little annoyance was nothing special. The diesel didn't seem to mind his rude tone. "Oh, I'm CPMR number 1, Independence," he said proudly. He beamed with pride, rolling over to their siding. There was his number, plain as day, painted on his side. He was small and had an AA wheel arrangement. That is to say, he had 2 small driving wheels in front and 2 under his cap. His silver and red livery stood out when compared to the 2 industrial black engines before him. His cab door opened, and his engineer and second man stepped out. They walked to the station office as the 2 steam engines stared in disbelief. "Number 1? Here? Really?" The coaches, who'd been resting in the station yard, perked up. "That's number 1? It is! Shh! He might hear you. I've always pictured him with a mustache." "I'm trying to sleep, man. Pipe down. He's smaller than I thought he'd be. If only Bluebell were here, she'd just die. He's a cute little engine, I'll give him that. See the number 1 in his sight? Oh, I hope he pulls me. Girls, control yourselves." The coaches tittered amongst themselves excitedly. To have the number 1 in their yard? What an honor. Independence hadn't been expecting such a warm welcome. He looked at the ground, smiling shyly. "Aw, gee, your coaches are too kind." This sent the coaches into a frenzy of flattered squeals. O'Brany did his best to hide his jealousy. Rikabod, on the other hand, was gazing down at the little engine from his perch atop his flatbed, his eyes full of admiration. It was a true honor to have the number 1 on his branch. That made him all the more curious about his purpose here. He spoke up. "Excuse me, Mr. CPMR number 1, but what did you mean by take us home?" The diesel looked up at him. "Mr. CPMR number 1? You don't have to call me that. You can just call me Independence. Indy for short. Guess I should have led with that." The coaches murmured amongst themselves. "Oh, how polite. Indy, what a name. Still trying to sleep, guys. Do you think he'll stay long? O'Brany's never that humble. Yeah, maybe Indy will take his place. I bet he'd complain less." O'Brany shot an angry look at the coaches. This inferior engine could never replace him, that he was sure of. He was a 5SS, a class of engine with a reputation of strength and dignity. This diesel looked like it was made of spare parts, hardly worthy to pull his train. Indy continued. "I'm going to be taking you home. Well, back to Martinville and Colensi Penrod. That's where I work most of the time, in the workshop there. I was built." Indy was cut off by O'Brany, who still wasn't entirely convinced that this was the number 1. "Why would I need to go all the way back there to be fixed? Union of Rikabod, I understand. He's just been in a serious accident." There was a pang of guilt in O'Brany's tone. He was fully aware that if he hadn't been such a fusspot and blown his left cylinder, Rikabod wouldn't have needed to take his trains and then get into that horrible accident. In one stroke of unchecked anger, he'd made his branch line 2 engines weaker and that much closer to being given to the STC. Suddenly, he didn't feel so proud of being a 5SS. He recovered. "Surely we could just be taken on the express goods to Tickply, couldn't we? That's just up the line from Martinville." O'Brany was referring to a massive express freight train that went from Tickply in Colensi Penrod all the way to Sunrise in Tamakio, then back. It came once every 3 days. The railwaymen called it the Tickply Flyer, and often the 2 moguls who pulled it, CPMR number 151 and CPMR number 152, tried to race boats to Sunrise. Why couldn't they simply hitch a ride with them? Indy frowned for the first time since he'd arrived. "Well, don't you think a train of that speed would be uncomfortable?" In truth, the Mogul twins who pulled the Flyer were famous, or rather infamous, for their reckless behavior. A trip on that train might get dicey. Still, something didn't sit right with O'Brany. Rikabod, however, was still starstruck. "Be nice, O'Brany. He's our guest," he said, not looking away from the diesel. O'Brany relented. The encounter paused as everyone heard a shrill whistle. Integrity, a 262, thundered by with a long train of people northbound for the central dockyard. He was in a terrible hurry, but his urgency was temporarily replaced by a confused look. He gazed at the 3 engines while he rattled by, The coach lights danced across the yard as the long train rattled across some points, then disappeared as fast as it had appeared. Indy's face grew visibly worried. "Who was that? I was told no more trains were due for at least 2 hours. "That was Integrity. He's filling in for us since we're, He must be running late." O'Brany studied the diesel's clearly distressed face. Indy's crew walked briskly over to the trio. They hopped into their engine and quickly began to couple up to the 2 damaged engines. "Come on, old boy. Looks like our window is shorter than we thought. We have to get moving before we're spotted," the driver whispered. "A prairie rushed by not 3 minutes ago," the little diesel whispered back in a panicked way. "He was hauling a whole bunch of people. I'm sure we were spotted." The driver scratched his chin. "No time for rest, then. We'd better be off now." O'Brany and Rikabod glanced at each other as the little diesel pulled them out of the station yard. Both had the same question. What were they whispering about? Integrity hadn't stopped moving all day. With 2 engines down, he had to pick up the slack. He was already 2 hours behind schedule due to hauling a small goods that Rikabod had needed to take, as well as a few short runs for O'Brany. He was sure the passengers were grumbling. His lantern illuminated the sleepers before him as they disappeared under his wheels. He pounded the rails and whistled shrilly as he approached North Joe Street Station. "Almost there, almost there, almost there, almost there," he panted. "We're going too fast, we're going too fast," the 10 coaches complained from behind. They were bound for the central dockyard. This train was a guaranteed connection with a big ocean liner bound for the Kingdom of Turnfinch, and he was sure the entire dockyard was in chaos because a giant ship was taking up space, waiting for his train to arrive. As he rattled through the station, he saw something he wasn't expecting. Sure, he saw Rikabod and O'Brany. Rikabod was on a flatbed and still had bits of car sticking out of his saddle tank. O'Brany didn't look worse for wear, but he knew that his other cylinder was blown. What he hadn't expected to see was a little gray diesel. His lamp illuminated the diesel's side, showing the label CPMR number 1. "Wait, what? Number 1? Integrity wore a confused look as he sped by the surprised-looking diesel and rattled out of the yard. The coaches didn't seem to notice. "That was odd," the prairie panted. For those who don't know, a prairie is a general name given to all locomotives with a 262 wheel arrangement. "Did you see that 3rd engine, driver?" The driver leaned out the cab window, and the wind nearly took his hat. Yes, I did. It looked like number 1, but what would he be doing all the way out here?" He ducked inside, and Integrity let loose another shrill whistle. They carried on through the warm night air and into the city. "I've no idea. Maybe he's come to help us. We could really use the help if we want to keep our branch line." News of the STC's plan to usurp the line from the CPMR had spread. Integrity had heard it from Taft, who'd heard it from Trapper, who'd heard it from CPMR number 149, who'd heard it from one of the rail cars. The coaches were listening now. They chatted amongst themselves. Integrity began to gently reduce his speed, and they coasted into the central dockyard. The central dockyard was in the northernmost borough of the city, Cy. The western dockyard, on the other hand, was often worked by Rikabod, and was in a borough of the city called Little Colinzi. While the western yard was a hub for freight, as it received shipments from the sea as well as the rest of Tamacchio, the central yard was not as industrious. Originally, the central dockyard was set up by Tamacchian pioneers to drive passengers across the southwestern channel into parts unknown, but was converted to accommodate goods work as well after the Suiamo conflict. The long and short of it was that the central yard could send and receive people and goods, and was set up to do so efficiently. It was patrolled by 2 small diesels, CPMR number 148 and 149. The SR Class 03s hadn't earned names yet, but worked silently and without fuss. They glided along the rails, small rolling boxes that workers often mistook for runaway freight cars. They'd been sold to the CPMR cheap a long time ago by the SR, the government-owned railway in a country far southeast of Sunrise called Stupistan. The deal happened at least 30 years ago. They arrived with rusty axles and worn-out air compressors, but other than that, they worked fine. As Integrity brought his train to a halt by the big ocean liner, CPMR number 149 rolled up beside him. He wore a cold expression that made Integrity uncomfortable. The diesel's gaze pierced through him. The passengers stormed out of the coaches and up a large ramp into the ocean lining. This distracted Integrity, and when he looked back, CPMR number 149 was gone. He shivered. Where did he was interrupted by a bump from behind. He looked back in time to see the diesel pulling his coaches away. "Thank you," he called, but got no response. He looked to the rails in front of him in time to see a long line of tankers filled with fuel roll into him. Oh! They collided with a firm bump, and the knuckle couplers locked together. They'd been pushed by CPMR number 148, who sidled up next to him. "These are bound for Fisterville. Trapper will bring them back tomorrow. He'll also be taking 3 loaded coaches to Mayor Way in Grand Square." Integrity felt 3 four-wheeled coaches glide into his tender and couple. He was now squished between the line of fuel tankers in front of him and the coaches behind him. He could hear the murmur of people in the coaches. "You'll unload them at the station and then continue to Fisterville, where you'll leave the empty coaches and tankers." Integrity was confused. "Who needs to go to Mayor Way?" He glanced at the big clock in the center of the yard. 12:23. "Construction workers," 148 said shortly. Integrity had another concern. He'd not been turned around, and with the train hooked to him, it seemed like he'd need to travel backwards. Isn't it unsafe to travel 10 to 1st at speed? 148 gave him the same cold stare his brother did. Without answering the question, he rode away. Okay then. None of the other engines on the branch got along with the diesels. It wasn't like they were bad engines, but they were terribly unfriendly. They never said hello, they never said goodbye, and when they did speak, it was only to give blunt instruction. In fact, the only engine anyone had seen get them to talk outside of work was an old non-standard 040 named Trapper. For those who don't know, a non-standard engine, when referred to in this context, is a locomotive that was not mass-produced. Trapper was, for lack of a better word, a one-off. He was also the oldest steam locomotive in the world. He was still kicking too, always pulling his weight. Trapper, though underpowered, was a friendly sort, and kept the O3s in check. Just the other day, Taft swore he'd seen all 3 laughing in the sheds. Integrity wondered, as he carefully traveled backwards down the line towards Grand Square, why they got along so well with Trapper, but gave everyone else the cold buffer. It wasn't long before he passed through North Joe Street Station again. He wasn't going very fast. He was positive he'd seen CPMR number 1 there, talking to Rikabod and O'Brany. Maybe he'd get to see him again? Unfortunately, as he trundled through the station, he saw no engines at all. All 3 had vanished. He whistled, "Hello? Anyone there?" The only response he got was from a very surprised mouse, who scurried across the yard and under a coach. "That's odder still," he said to no one in particular. "Where'd they all go?" The 262 wanted to stop and ask the station master about the 3 missing engines, but his driver wouldn't let him. They were probably moved to a siding down in the western dockyard. Besides, it'd be a shame to wake the station master at this time of night. The reasoning was sound, so Integrity didn't push the issue any further. The train rolled through the yard and towards Grand Square. Indy pulled O'Brany and Rikabod along an old, disused line. It was in a lonely part of Little Colenzi, which was mostly full of condemned buildings and disused factories. It was a solemn place. The rails below them were uneven, and they creaked loudly. The sounds of the train echoed around the abandoned industrial complex. Indy's eyes darted around. "They've really let the outskirts of the city rot, haven't they?" O'Brany agreed. "I've never been down this part of the line." They passed a junkyard. Indy's lamp shined on an old, half-demolished car dangling in the grips of a large grabber. "No one has for a long time," Rikabod chimed in. "Not since the Russell Limited was cancelled." O'Brany and Indy were surprised. "What," asked O'Brany, "is the Russell Limited?" "Was," Rikabod corrected. "Taft told me. There's a large triangular junction, also known as a Y-track, that connects the rails leading to North Joe Street Station, the western dockyard, and the gate line." "The gate line? That's the line leading out of the city, right?" O'Brany asked, trying to sound informed. Indy quietly listened, keeping an eye on the line. "That's correct. A long time ago, Taft..." Indy perked up. "Wait, who's Taft?" "He's a 440 holiday class. He was built by the Taft Railroading Workshops. He works on the branch with us." O'Brany was impressed by Rikabod's extensive knowledge. "Okay, sorry. Please continue." He used to take trains called the Rissel Limited between North Drew Street, which is where we're coming from, and Rissel, a city far west of Sunrise. Oh, I know where Rissel is. We're headed there now before I take you on to Colinzi Penrod. I've actually just come from— Get to the point, O'Brany interrupted. Rikabod gave him a disapproving look, then continued. These trains stopped running along this line when passenger facilities were built at the central dockyard. Now that Taft's trains run straight through to there, there's no need to use these rails. There was a long silence as the three engines rolled through the ghostly remains of what used to be a bustling freight depot. That explains why the rails suck, O'Brany said bluntly. Why are all the buildings here abandoned? They routed over a particularly rough patch, and Rikabod thought he was going to fall off his flatbed. Indy reduced his speed, and Rikabod answered. Part of it is that all the business moved further in, closer to the cheap housing that dots Little Colinzi. The engines went quiet. They passed by what appeared to be a small group of suspicious-looking people, huddled together under an ancient-looking street lamp. As they passed, one of them turned to face them. His face went pale. He quickly put something in his pocket, motioned to the others, and the whole lot of them disappeared behind a battered, but still in use, canning factory. Rikabod stammered, trying to regain his train of thought. O'Brany helped him find it. You were talking about why this place is a giant slum? Rikabod chuckled at his cousin's bluntness, which was the 5SS's goal. When the train stopped coming through, the infrastructure to support some of the business here dried up. O'Brany gave his cousin a rueful smile. How do you know all this anyway? It's not like you can just head down to the library. I'm a good listener, unlike, some engines I could mention. The subtle tank trailed off, giving his cousin a sly look. Ha! O'Brany's voice bounced off the ancient buildings. I don't know what you're trying to imply. O'Brany knew his cousin was referring to his habit of interrupting. The three engines had almost forgotten how scary their surroundings were. Before they knew it, they'd reached the gate line. Indy had needed to travel slowly on the old, disused track, but now he had a chance to stretch his wheels. The tiny diesel began to pick up speed. His second man checked his gauges. Don't dawdle, Indy. We've still got a clear 320 miles to go before Rissel. Hey, at least we've got clear rails and green lights to guide us. O'Brany didn't share the positive sentiments. Is it really 320 miles? O'Brany wasn't a bad engine, but he was often impatient. Silly, of course it is. Didn't you have to make this trip when you came to work on the branch? Rikabod glanced back at his cousin, who was wearing a frustrated scowl as he rolled behind. I came by boat, he said in a lordly manner. They said a trip of that size was unbefitting an engine as grand as myself. More likely they didn't think you could make it, Indy squeaked from in front. The diesel and the 1SS shared in a few giggles at O'Brany's expense. O'Brany glared. My tanks are more than a match for this journey. My question is, will you be able to make it? You're the one pulling us. Indy winked at Rikabod. Well, my small tanks could never hold enough diesel fuel for a journey like this. I was planning on getting Driver to peel off your paint and use it for fuel. That is how diesel engines run, you know. O'Brany didn't know much about diesels. In fact, he'd gone out of his way to not learn about them. Pug, do they really use paint as fuel? O'Brany looked up at his cousin. Rikabod didn't respond. He only gave O'Brany a grim expression. You wouldn't dare. I would then, said Indy in a determined sort of way. Unless you want to be marooned out here when I run out of fuel. I suppose that Taft fellow might find us in a few days. Rikabod snickered. O'Brany gulped. It wouldn't be proper for a 5SS like me to be seen without my paint. Surely. The large tank engine glanced up at Rikabod pleadingly. Pug, old boy, would you be willing to, for the dignity of the railroad, I mean... Well, Rikabod gave O'Brany a smirk. What? Give my nice black paint away? You wouldn't ask your own cousin to sacrifice his livery, would you? O'Brany couldn't argue. Well, I suppose it'd serve me right, wouldn't it? You got in an accident filling in for me. It's only fair that I... His voice trailed off in a thoughtful way. Finally, Indy and Rikabod couldn't hold it in. You silly engine. Diesels don't run on paint. They run on diesel. That's why they're called diesels. They burst out laughing. It could be heard for miles. O'Brany wasn't feeling as jovial, but as the two engines laughed and laughed, he couldn't help but join in. Despite his best efforts, he cracked a smile. "Attaboy, O'Brany!" cheered Indy from in front. The big tank engine began to chuckle, and soon the three engines were drowning in laughter as they rolled away from sunrise and into the night. An important-looking foreman paced on the Mayorway station platform. He was a short, skinny man. If one were observant, they could deduce that he was in fact Stupistanian. His small frame stood out in the well-lit station. He wrung his hands nervously, and occasionally he bit his nails. He'd sit down on one of the benches, then, after only a few seconds, he'd stand up and begin pacing again. Presently, he heard two shrill whistles and a distant ringing bell. It startled him, and his eyes flashed to the station clock. That was odd. The workers weren't scheduled to show up for another 7 minutes. Still, despite the clock, the foreman looked as three small coaches appeared next to the platform. The front coach had a man leaning out the front window, keeping an eye on the track and communicating with the engine using a lamp. The foreman glanced down the length of the train to see it was being pushed 10 to first by a big engine. He rushed over to the engine. "You're early," the foreman said excitedly. The engine was Integrity. "We are?" he asked. The conductor and brakeman began opening the doors and helping the workers out. "Yes, by nearly 8 minutes, too. I was worried that you wouldn't get here at all, given the talk of the STC going around, but you great engine, you proved me wrong. Running tinder first, no less." Integrity's crew leaned out their engine. "Thank you, sir. We do our best, you know." Integrity nodded in a humble way. Before the foreman knew it, the workers were out and the coaches locked up. "Oh!" Integrity heard the conductor's whistle and saw the brakeman wave his lamp. He whistled a response and began to roll away, pushing the now empty coaches 10 to first. "I must be off. Have to keep time." "Thank you for the kind words, mister." The foreman watched in stunned silence as the 262 rolled away. He saw that not only was he pushing coaches, but he was pulling a long line of tankers filled with fuel. A spark leapt from his tall funnel, and for a moment the foreman thought he saw him falter. But the engine quickly recovered. Almost like magic, the rails were empty, and the only proof a train had ever been there was the distant sounds of wheels clattering over tracks. The foreman straightened his hat and went to address his crew as the determined train disappeared into the night. "We're early now," Integrity cheered. The coaches sang along. "Keep up the pace, keep up the pace." The prairie beamed with pride. He was getting his second wind, spurred on by the kind words of the foreman. He had built up a nice lot of steam and ached to use it, but he knew from experience the dangers of traveling too fast 10 to first. Besides, he was in the Grand Square right now. Most of the rails went through the center of roads here. It'd be foolish to speed, especially after what had just happened to Union of Rikabod. It was late now, and the streets were mostly barren. Only a few cars traveled during these hours. After a recent accident involving a hot rod, all the drivers in the city had been giving trains a wide berth. That was just fine by Integrity, although he wished it hadn't taken the destruction of a car and the harm of a fellow engine to get them to do so. The rest of the journey was uneventful, save for a few people scurrying out of the way. The city, especially Grand Square, was host to a lively nightlife, and Integrity would often watch, as he passed behind a building or two, people stumble from places his firemen called hip locales. His driver would often roll his eyes at this. As the long train entered Fisterville, a borough southwest of Grand Square, the rails left the roads and once again only shared their space with ballast. Fisterville was the smallest borough of the city and was home to many manufacturing jobs. The CPMR was lucky that the Sunrise branch ran to Fisterville, as many profitable freight trains got their cargo here. There was a massive goods yard near the northern end of the borough that most companies left their goods in, to be taken on to the center or western dockyards. The yard didn't have a dedicated switcher, and so was often organized by whoever was there at the time. Integrity coasted into the yard, whistling to make anyone who was there aware of his presence. "We made it. Thank goodness, my arms are getting tired," complained the fireman as Integrity backed into a siding. The 3 coaches were uncoupled, and Integrity went to put his tankers away. "Oh my, good siding?" said one. "Dreadful, and after we ran so smoothly too," said the second. "We live in troubled times indeed. Coaches in goods yards, engines running 10 to first, diesels prowling about the dockside. Whatever is a coach supposed to do?" They all murmured anxiously. Integrity laughed as he began shunting his tankers into several different sidings, according to the yardmaster. "Never mind, girls. Trapper will be along to take you back once the sun comes up." This didn't seem to satisfy the coaches, but they hushed their complaints. Towards the northern part of the yard was a place for engines. It had a turntable and a siding dedicated to refueling. The siding had a diesel pump, a water tower, and a coal hopper. There was also an oil tower being built there, although what this was, Integrity hadn't the foggiest. The 262 puffed onto the turntable. His tender was still more than half full, so time wasn't wasted on filling it. Integrity sidled back into the yard after being turned around. "I've still got plenty of steam. I'll organize these trains so Trapper won't have to in the morning. It's the right thing to do," he said to himself. Integrity always did his best to live up to his name. He had been named Integrity by his old railway, the MACR, because he was the first Integrity-class locomotive built. He was told it had something to do with old naval traditions, but he didn't really understand. He and his class were commissioned as replacements for an aging fleet of engines called the Grapeshot class. The name was a bit ironic. They were 460s and had a habit of using water too quickly and overproducing steam compared to their smaller boilers. They'd often build up too much condensation in their cylinders, and when they started, the water would spray out in wild directions. People were known to duck and cover, shouting, "Here comes the Grapeshot!" There was also the little problem that, when overproducing steam and not having enough water, the engines were known to, well, explode. When he and his brothers were purchased, most of the Grapeshots were withdrawn and scrapped. Integrity felt a sinking feeling in his firebox as he remembered that. As he shunted a few boxcars full of mass-produced toys, he wondered if there were any left. He decided it was best not to think about it. The cavalcade of Indy, Rikabod and O'Brany had stopped. There were a lot of stations and yards between Sunrise and Rissell. Indy was only a little engine and couldn't go much faster than 40 on a good day. Besides, his tanks really weren't large enough for a long journey like this, so they had needed to stop to refuel. The yard they were at was really quite small. It rested right next to a large grain processing plant. The 3 engines were switched onto an old disused siding behind a line of big silos in a brick building. In the dark of night, the siding hid them from view. Weeds grew between the tracks, and the rails were rusty. There was an old fuel pump tucked away here, only about a quarter full. "Ew, what a dirty siding," O'Brany complained. "Why can't we be put out there by the freight cars?" "I don't know what you're complaining about. I'm the one who has to top off using this ancient fuel." The crew hooked up the old hose to Indy's tank, and with an unhealthy sloshing noise, it was switched on. He felt the diesel slowly trickle into his tank. It felt heavy and smelled like cheap perfume. Yuck! His face was wrought with disgust. "Is this diesel or mud?" The second man chuckled, then yawned. His driver did the same. "Well, we've got about 20 minutes before we need to get moving again. I'm gonna go stretch my legs." The crew walked off into the night, leaving the 3 alone. O'Brany grumbled some more. "I don't get why we have to stay back here with you," he shot an annoyed look at the diesel, who rolled his eyes. "I don't think it's so bad," Rikabod mumbled. "You," O'Brany said, "get to rest on that flatbed. I'm down here. My wheels have to touch all this rust and stuff. This siding is worse than that old line in Little Colenzi." O'Brany thought for a moment. "Hey, why did we take that old line anyway?" Indy began to look nervous. "What do you mean?" "I mean, surely it would have been safer to take that other line down to the West Dockyard." "Well, my way was faster." Huh. O'Brany didn't sound convinced. This whole scenario reeked of a scandal to him. The number 1 coming in and hauling away 2 broken engines in the dead of night, not to mention how panicked the diesel seemed when he was spotted by Integrity. Then there was all that whispering between him and his crew, going down a disused line, and now they were in a siding hidden from view. It was almost like he didn't want them to be seen. "Indy, be honest with me," O'Brany said after a pause. The other two engines looked back. "You're the number one, and I respect that. I know I've been a bit rough. I haven't been having a very good week." He let out a sigh. "Why are we hiding?" Indy was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean we've been taking these routes that keep us out of sight. For tender's sake, we departed at midnight. Something is going on, and I won't move another inch until you tell us." Rikabod remained silent. Indy looked at the rails, then gave an answer. "I'll level with you. In about 3 days, there's going to be a city council meeting in Sunrise. There's a good chance they're going to turn the branch over to the STC, and that would include you." O'Brany scoffed. "I still don't get what gives them the right. Look, the CPMR is a Kalensian company, but Sunrise is a Tamakian city. So is Rissel. The laws get a bit complicated because of that. I don't really understand it myself, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if the Sunrise branch is given to the STC, they're probably going to get rid of all you steam engines." O'Brany seemed offended. "Even a grand 5SS like me? Especially you! Your class was withdrawn like 50 years ago. Both of you are out of commission right now. Do you think they'd really spare the resources to fix you? You'd be the first to go." Indy seemed to be getting frustrated. "So Control's moving you to Kalensi Penrod. You'll be safe there if the branch really is handed over." O'Brany was quiet. He looked stunned. Rikabod filled the vacuum of sound. "But why do we need to sneak around? They don't own us yet, so they can't stop the CPMR from relocating us." His voice was nervous, weak. "Again, the laws are complicated. It's not technically illegal to move you out, but if anyone caught wind, there could be grounds for a lawsuit. It's best if no one knows what we're doing." There was a harsh silence. Was the branch really going to be given away? The 1SS and 5SS hadn't really thought that that was likely. They'd always worked hard to save the city and thought the city would repay them in kindness. If Control thought it was likely, though, what about all their friends? Taft and Integrity were steam engines, and the O3s were pretty old too. Trapper might be put in a museum, but the rest... Indy broke the silence. "You know, not all hope is lost. This really is more of a precaution." The little diesel sounded hopeful. "I have faith that the branch won't be given away. Control is sending representatives to the meeting to plead our case. They said they had big plans for your branch. I don't think they'll let them take it away." The 3 engines silently decided to drop the subject. They rested, preparing themselves for a long journey ahead. They could only hope their branch was safe and their friends wouldn't end up on the scrap heap. The journey was longer than expected. Frequent stops for fuel and out-of-sight routes meant that what should have taken only 1 day dragged on into 3. O'Brany wondered how Indy had gotten to Sunrise within less than a day of them breaking down, but decided the issue wasn't worth pursuing. As they finally rolled through Rissel, the day of the council meeting was upon them. Indy's positive attitude and constant reassurance had Rikabod feeling much better about the whole ordeal. They rattled through the seaside city, which was much more accommodating to locomotives. None of the rails went through or traveled on streets. The city was beautiful. They clearly took pride in their history here. Rikabod swore there was a mural every 3 blocks, but O'Brany wasn't so sure. He wasn't really paying attention to his surroundings. Honestly, he was stressing out. He was worried about the branch line. In particular, he was worried about his favorite coach, Bluebell. He knew she would put up a fight. She liked to slip on her brake if an engine was annoying her. He always had to keep her in mind. She was feisty that way. If she was given to the STC, he wasn't sure if they would put up with her nonsense like he did. What would they do to Taft? He was getting on in years, and he had quite a lot of valuable copper tubing. What if they stripped him, then left him to rot? No, that simply wouldn't do, not a fate befitting an engine as grand as Taft. Oh, if only O'Brany hadn't lost his temper, they wouldn't be in this mess. The 5SS was broken from his thoughts as they routed over a huge bridge extending from the dockside. Huh? What? Where are we? He looked around. Rikabod filled him in, while Indy struggled up front. We're almost home, cousin. We've just crossed the bridge onto Little Tamakio. Once we cross the Bagora Bridge, we'll be safe. O'Brany looked around them. They were on one of two large islands that rested between Tamakio and Kalenzi Penra. Each island had a large bridge connecting them to their respective mainlands. Little Tamakio had a bridge connecting to Tamakio and Res Jessel to Kalenzi Penra. These bridges were constructed a long time ago, as the waterways between the islands and their mainlands were too narrow to be traversed safely. The two islands were connected by an absolutely massive lifting bridge, a little over 200 feet in length, called the Bagora Bridge. It had been constructed for similar reasons, mainly because the treacherous waters had given the old boats trouble crossing the divide back some 300 years ago. Anyway, the island marked the final stretch of their journey. Indy was straining himself from the front. He felt the weight in his rear coupler as he growled across the bridge and onto the lush island of Little Tamakio. Come on! Come on! Almost there! Almost there! The diesel groaned. They were making their way through a nameless beachside town when Indy's engine made a funny sound. As they trundled onto a lonely, deserted part of the island, Indy made an unhealthy grinding noise. I feel so weak. Indy coughed violently. Can't breathe. Rikabod and O'Brany noticed their companion. Is everything all right? Asked Rikabod. Something wrong in my... You can do it, Indy, cheered O'Brany. You've made it this far. The little diesel tried hard, but couldn't keep going. With a whimper, he came to a stop, right next to the seaside. The morning wind tugged at the train, threatening to push them back, so they set Indy's brakes. The little engine spewed thick black smoke from his vents. Oh, whatever's happened? His crew quickly jumped out as the smoke drifted through the air. O'Brany and Rikabod watched with worry. That's done it, shouted his driver. He threw his hat against the ground in frustration. His second man had opened his side and was examining his engine. The driver fumed. Don't even bother, I know what happened. We've been having trouble ever since we took on that ancient fuel. I bet it had mud or water or moss or something in it. His tubes are probably clogged to hell and back. The second man ignored his angry coworker and continued to assess the situation. O'Brany looked at the driver with uncharacteristic sympathy. You might try a walk. Helps me calm down. Well, I don't go for walks per se, but the driver cut him off. I know what you're talking about. I'm not stupid, he snapped. O'Brany looked offended and was about to tell him off when the driver's face softened. He sighed. Sorry, this whole trip has been stressful. Maybe I do need a walk. He glanced at the second man, as if for permission. The second man furrowed his eyebrows, turned away, and waved his hand as if to say, Fine, go have your little hissy fit, I'll handle this. The driver wisely decided to take his leave, carrying a flagman's kit. After an awkward few minutes, the second man rose to his feet. He was covered in oil. It's worse than we thought. Your fuel filter was clogged with whatever was in that fuel. He wiped his hands on his pants. Your engine is blocked up. We won't be going anywhere. The three engines gasped. They racked their smoke boxes, save for Andy, who didn't have a smoke box, trying to figure out a solution. Rikabod spoke up first. Can't we phone for another engine? Well, for starters, this whole run was supposed to be a secret, the second man said. We're also out of phone range. O'Brany frowned. Phones have range? I don't really want to explain it right now, but yeah. We've been taking out-of-the-way routes, and in this case, that meant going out of range of cell towers. Indy coughed, then suggested another idea. What about the wind? Can't we just, I don't know, attach a sail to me? A queer look crossed his face. Now that I say that out loud. They all had a good laugh, but presently were still stuck. O'Brany finally gave a suggestion. He said it in a low, almost whisper. I could finish the journey. Huh? Rikabod looked back. I said I could finish the journey! The others were in stunned silence. I mean, I've got one good cylinder, and we're only like 10 miles from the bridge. I could get water from the sea, and there's plenty of wood lying around. He didn't sound enthusiastic. Indy spoke up. Isn't that dangerous? The wood will pack your smoke box with ash, and I don't even want to think about the salt water. O'Brany shot him a look. I know that, but what other choice do we have? If we don't cross that bridge... Everyone was silent. Then it's settled, O'Brany said mournfully. He looked at the second man. There's a couple of buckets in my cab. The second man didn't need telling twice. He set to work hauling water from the sea and draining it into his large tank. It was cold and uncomfortable. Talk about undignified. The driver returned and set to work collecting wood and anything else flammable. Lucky I was a Boy Scout, eh? The driver chuckled. Just get that fire going and pray we don't explode, the second man said. Rikabod was silent, looking back at his cousin. He gave a hopeful smile. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, we've still got 10 more miles. Integrity had worked his tender off. Back and forth, up and down, passengers, freight, and everything in between. The 262 knew that if he didn't put his best wheel forwards, the branch would close, and that would never do. Every train he pulled was a representation of the branch's efficiency. Every happy customer was one more person who might want them to stay. Every second, every dollar, it counted. He was a big engine, but the work pushed him. He hadn't been washed, and the soot from his smoke gathered around his tall funnel. He was often short of steam, but managed to make it to every stop on time. Prairie hadn't realized that today was the big day. He was pulling a long 27-car train full of paper, ink, and plastics. There were 3 cars dedicated specifically to 8-day clocks built in the Kingdom of Turnfetch. Integrity was concentrating on pulling the long train gently, so as to not damage the clocks. He steamed slowly through Grand Square. He'd taken a longer route to get to the massive goods yard in Fisterville, so as to not block as much traffic. Integrity was glad to not be blocking as many people, but all the same was growing impatient. His face was sour, his rods creaked, his bearings squeaked, and his cylinder seemed ready to burst. He trundled through Emerald Road Station at a snail's pace. He whistled quickly as they passed. Peep, peep! Can we get a move on, driver? We're gonna be late at this speed. Integrity begged his driver to let him go faster. His safety valve went off, and he let off steam. His fireman checked his gauges. He leaned out the window and called to his engine. Easy, boy. You're making too much steam. Integrity fussed at the front of the train. But we'll be late! No, we won't, you old fusspot. You'll see, we'll be right on time. Unless, of course, you want to smash all those clocks to bits. Integrity harumphed and continued to puff slowly down the line. It was 10:20 a.m. when they got to the Fisterville goods yard. Trapper was waiting in a siding. Hello, Integrity. You look upset. Whatever's the matter? Integrity frowned. He looked very tired. Oh, Trapper. We were switched onto a longer route so we wouldn't interrupt traffic, and I had to go slow because of those clocks, and I'm sure we're late. Integrity braked, and the train came to a halt within the yard limits. He was uncoupled, and still wishing steam, he rolled over to the turntable. Trapper gave a chuckle. Not by my account. You're right on time, dear boy. 10:20 a.m. On the dot, I might add. The old 040 chuntered along, separating the long train into smaller trains and sorting them out. Integrity glanced at a clock hanging haphazardly off the base of a big jib crane, still frowning. I was hoping to be early. I want to show the good people of this city just how much of an asset we are. I'd be ashamed to let my line be taken over by those no-good, low-down, paint-peeling... Easy there, youngster, Trapper interjected, gently rolling the cars full of clocks over to a platform where some workmen were waiting to unload them by hand. I appreciate the spirit, I really do, but it's not going to do us any good right now. Integrity looked at Trapper nervously. Why? The council meeting started at 9 a.m., remember? It's been going on for nearly an hour and a half. Driver's listening to it on his pocket radio thing. Trapper's fireman, a young Tamakian who appeared to be no more than 14, leaned out his side, only using his left foot and left hand to keep himself from falling. It's called a cell phone, Grandpuff. It's like a two-way radio, a camera, compass, flashlight, and map all rolled into one. The boy giggled. He was covered head to toe in coal dust. In particular, his cheeks were like two black holes, they were so dirty. Well, whatever it is, it's not as important as your safety. Stop hanging out like that. You'd break this old engine's heart if you fell. The boy rolled his eyes and got back in the cab. Integrity couldn't hold it in. Trap her? It's going on right now? Shouldn't we be doing something, or pleading our case, or helping in some way? Integrity's eyes darted around. He rolled forward in a panic, then collided with a very surprised caboose. Hey, watch it there, young buck, the caboose shouted. The old engine smiled. Now, just how would a locomotive plead his case? By chugging down to the courthouse? Steady yourself, youngster. If it's rocking your wheels that much, ask your driver to tune in with his cell radio. Cell phone, you old coot, phone. Trapper glanced back to see his fireman hanging out of his cab again. What did I tell you about hanging out the cab? Don't make me come back there. Integrity's driver switched on his phone and pulled up something he called a live feed of the meeting. Integrity wasn't sure why his driver carried around feed, let alone live ones, but he was too focused on the meeting to ask. He listened intently as the fate of the branch was decided. It had been a long 3 hours, but O'Brany was finally ready. His boiler felt heavy. He was sure it was full of salt and minerals from the seawater. He was beginning to wonder if this was even worth it. All right, get in the cab, will you? Let's get this over with. You know how to drive a steam locomotive, right? He raised an eyebrow at the crew. They shrugged. Great master help us, O'Brany grumbled. In front of him was Rikabod on a flatbed in one very sick diesel. Behind him, an uncertain future. All he needed to do was get across the Bagora Bridge. He started with a great effort, dropping sand on the rails. He felt weak. His left cylinder wheeshed, but he got no power from it. His right cylinder picked up the slack. The entire weight of the train was on his front. Come on! He creaked and groaned in ways he didn't know possible. His wheels began to move, slowly. They gripped the rails fiercely. First he moved an inch. Then he moved 2. Then 3. Then 4. Then a foot. Come on! Then another foot. His wheels completed a rotation. Then another. Come on! Then another. Then another. Then another. He began to pick up speed. He was going slow. Second by second, minute by minute, his speedometer's needle moved up. Son of a gun, we're actually doing it, the driver cheered. What do you mean we? O'Brany was straining. He felt the steel beginning to build up in his tubes. The minerals coated his insides. He faltered. Keep at it, O'Brany, shouted the second man. The tank engine continued. The sea wind blew against his sides, but he was too focused to care. Heavy, dark clouds of smoke billowed from his funnel. It coated the surrounding landscape in soot. He was going 10 miles per hour. Rikabod was astonished. How was this even remotely possible? Did the laws of physics just not apply to his cousin? How was he moving? Maybe the 5 SS's really were the best. O'Brany had always bragged about his class, but until now Rikabod had thought he was just being arrogant. Presently, O'Brany wasn't thinking about his class. He was thinking about his cousin. If they didn't cross the bridge, and the line was closed, he was sure the settle tank would be scrapped, and it would be all his fault. He couldn't live with that on his conscience. He just kept moving. The rest was a blur. He felt something change under his wheels, but he didn't pay attention. He thought he heard shouting, but he didn't pay attention to that either. I'll cross the bridge, he shouted. I'll cross it. I'll cross it. I'll... He opened his eyes. I've crossed it! We've made it! We've made it! They all cheered as the driver shut off steam. They quickly damped his fire and the big tank engine coasted to a stop. They were on Ras Jussel now. Safe at last, safe at last. The crew hopped out and shouted to the heavens, "You've done it! No idea how, but by the lender we made it!" O'Brany couldn't hear them. He had shut his eyes and promptly fell asleep. Everyone piped down. He'd earned a good rest. He didn't even wake up when help finally arrived, nor when they got to Martinville Works. They left him on a siding inside a wide-open shed and remained respectfully quiet. O'Brany really wasn't a bad engine when it came down to it. Just a bit grumpy. The council didn't end up giving the branch away. As many problems as it had, they'd served the community well. The meeting was full of people talking about how useful the CPMR had been to Sunrise. A woman in coveralls talked about how she'd never been late to work. A construction foreman praised their timeliness, even when the trains were running past midnight. A little boy had talked about how much he looked forward to watching the steam engines rush around every morning. A factory manager mentioned that none of their cargo was ever spilled or broken, which was something not even the STC could claim. However, not everyone was a fan of the CPMR. A man complained about all the smoke the trains made. A motorist talked passionately about how dangerous the exposed rods were to people in cars, and a man in a bow tie argued that their whistles and bells were too loud. After everyone had said their piece, a representative from the CPMR was given the stand. He explained to the council that the CPMR had something big planned for the branch line, and that giving it away would not only upset their plans, but have economic impacts as well. After all, Kalenzi Penrod supplied the city with an outrageous amount of raw material, and some Kalenzians might see the closure of the branch as an insult. After a lengthy discussion, it was decided that if the CPMR, and thus the steam locomotives, were going to stay, there would have to be some new rules. No, not just rules, laws. Laws that would affect the rails of Sunrise for years to come. And affect Sunrise they surely did.